Stand on the red gravel plain of the Gibson Desert at midday and look toward the horizon. You see spinifex grass, ironstone pebbles, low mulga scrub, and a straight line where red dirt meets blue sky. The entire landscape rests on a continuous bedrock crust that has remained exposed to the open atmosphere for over 500 million years. What is remarkable about this continent is not merely its immense scale, but how long its surface processes went misunderstood by colonial cartographers and early geologists, who assumed Australian landscapes behaved like the dynamic, glaciated systems of the Northern Hemisphere. How does a landmass survive when the fundamental geological forces that build mountains elsewhere on Earth have been absent for hundreds of millions of years? Later in this countdown, at item 21, we will examine how the continent's official coordinate grid must be manually corrected by satellite engineers because the ground beneath our feet is traveling faster than any other landmass. At number 4, we will examine an inland river system that flows backwards into the desert across an area larger than Western Europe. Today we are counting down 40 geography facts that reveal the true mechanisms shaping the Australian continent. Fact 40. A continent wider than the moon. Australia measures approximately 4,000 kilometres from Steep Point in Western Australia across to Cape Byron in New South Wales. If overlaid across the lunar disk, the Australian mainland spans a greater linear distance than the 3,474 kilometre diameter of the moon. Because Mercator projections distort mid-latitude regions, the continent appears significantly compressed on standard world maps. Fact 39. The coastline paradox on the southern edge. The official mainland coastline of Australia measures roughly 35,800 kilometres. Incorporating all offshore islands, bays, estuaries and tidal inlets, Geoscience Australia records the total shoreline at nearly 60,000 kilometres. The Great Australian Bight alone presents an unbroken line of limestone cliffs spanning more than 800 kilometres without a single natural harbour. Fact 38. More than 8,000 islands. Draped around the continental shelf sit 8,222 recorded islands. The largest, Tasmania, covers more than 68,000 square kilometres and represents a drowned highland block separated from the mainland when Bass Strait flooded 12,000 years ago. Further north, K'gari represents the largest sand island in the world, built entirely from silicious quartz grains transported northward along the coast over hundreds of thousands of years. Fact 37. The missing glaciers. While the Northern Hemisphere was sculpted by massive ice sheets during the last glacial maximum, the Australian mainland was almost entirely untouched by ice. Glaciation was confined to a tiny 70 square kilometre patch around Mount Kosciuszko in New South Wales and portions of the Central Highlands in Tasmania. The rest of the continent experienced severe aridity and wind erosion rather than glacial scouring. Fact 36. A surface that refuses to weather down. Because continental glaciers never strip the soil down to fresh bedrock, Australia possesses some of the oldest, most weathered topsoils on Earth. In the Yilgarn Craton of Western Australia, deep chemical weathering profiles known as regolith extend up to 150 metres beneath the surface. The ground has been leaching minerals undisturbed since the Mesozoic era. Fact 35. The deepest gorge cut through horizontal sandstone. In the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, the Grose Valley and Jamison Valley plunge through over 600 metres of Triassic Narrabeen and Hawkesbury sandstone. Unlike glacial fjords, these sheer vertical chasms were carved purely by fluvial erosion and sapping along natural joint lines, leaving vertical escarpments standing above dense eucalyptus forests. Fact 34. A monolith that is only the tip of a buried formation. Uluru in the Northern Territory rises 348 metres above the surrounding plain, but geological surveys confirm the Arcosic sandstone strata plunge steeply into the subsurface for roughly 6 kilometres. What appears as a solitary monolith is the upturned edge of a colossal underground sedimentary fan deposited during the Petermann orogeny over 500 million years ago. Fact 33. A vertical escarpment that stretches for hundreds of kilometres. Along the eastern margin of the continent, the Great Dividing Range forms a continuous structural barrier known as the Great Escarpment. In northern New South Wales, the drop from the New England tableland into coastal river valleys forms sheer vertical precipices like those at Wallamombi Falls, where water drops 220 metres into a deeply incised gorge. This wall formed as the continental margin uplifted during the opening of the Tasman Sea 80 million years ago. Fact 32. Waterfalls that drop into dry air. At Wallerman Falls in Girringa National Park, northern Queensland, Stony Creek plunges 268 metres in a single clear drop, making it the highest permanent single-drop waterfall on the continent. The sheer gorge wall behind it was carved by headward erosion, eating back into the Atherton tableland over 50 million years. During the dry season, the volume drops so low that the plunging stream atomizes into mist before reaching the 20-metre-deep plunge pool below. Fact 31. The world's oldest surviving crust. In the Jack Hills of Western Australia, geologists from Curtin University and the Australian National University extracted microscopic zircon crystals embedded in metamorphosed sedimentary conglomerates. Uranium-lead dating confirmed these zircons formed up to 4.4 billion years ago, just 160 million years after the Earth formed. Oxygen isotope ratios inside these crystals revealed that liquid water and proto-continental crust existed far earlier than standard models assumed. Fact 30. A highway cut through shifting sand. The air highway crosses the Nullarbor Plain for 1,664 kilometres between Ceduna in South Australia and Norseman in Western Australia. Embedded along this route is the 90-mile Strait, an unbroken stretch of tarmac running 146.6 kilometres without a single bend. The road sits atop a continuous cast limestone slab up to 300 metres thick, deposited when an Eocene shallow sea covered southern Australia 40 million years ago. Fact 29. The subterranean pipeline that defied gravity. In 1903, Western Australian engineer Charles Yelverton O'Connor completed the Goldfields water supply scheme, pumping fresh water 530 kilometres from Mundaring Weir near Perth to the arid goldfields of Kalgoorlie. The system relied on 8 steam-driven pumping stations to lift over 20 million litres of water per day across a 390-metre elevation gain through steel locking bar pipes. At its opening, it was the longest freshwater pipeline in the world. Fact 28. A network of drowned limestone caverns. Beneath the limestone surface of the Nullarbor lie hundreds of immense solution collapse caves, including Cocklebiddy Cave. In 1983, cave divers mapped a 6.5-kilometre submerged tunnel system beneath the desert, establishing a world record for underground cave penetration. The groundwater inside these flooded conduits remains hypersaline, fed by ancient rainfall that percolated through porous limestone fractures over hundreds of thousands of years. Fact 27. The ancient staircase carved into a volcanic plug. In the Warrumbungle Range of northwestern New South Wales, the Grand High Tops Trail ascends past the Breadknife, a vertical trachyte dike rising 90 metres high and spanning only a few metres wide. This razor-sharp wall is the exposed volcanic conduit of a shield volcano that erupted 17 million years ago. The softer surrounding basaltic breccias eroded away completely, leaving only the hardened crystalline lava core standing above the surrounding plains. Fact 26. A town built inside an extinct volcano. The township of Mount Gambier in southeastern South Australia sits directly upon the Newer Volcanics province, an active volcanic field containing roughly 400 individual eruptive centres. In the centre of town, the Blue Lake occupies a volcanic Mar crater formed by explosive phreatomagmatic eruptions just under 5,000 years ago. Every November, the lake water undergoes a chemical phase transition, shifting from a dull winter grey to a cobalt blue as calcite precipitates out of the warming upper layer. Fact 25. The sun that stays constant in the winter sky. Across the northern third of the continent, inside the tropical zone, seasonal variation is dictated by the movement of the monsoon trough. In Darwin, daylight variation between summer and winter solstice is barely 1 hour and 20 minutes. For First Nations groups across the top end, the annual cycle is split into 6 distinct seasons, defined by wind direction, humidity, and the flowering cycles of native speargrass, rather than the 4 European temperate seasons. Yet further south, the stability of the continent's climate breaks against an ancient dry barrier that colonial scientists spent decades trying to map. Fact 24. The line where agriculture permanently stopped. In 1865, following severe drought across South Australia, Surveyor General George Goyder rode 3,000 kilometres on horseback to map the ecological boundary between saltbush and perennial grasses. Goyder's line marked the absolute northern limit of reliable winter rainfall, averaging roughly 250 millimetres annually. Farmers who ignored the line and ploughed further north lost their crops and abandoned their homesteads during the dry years of the 1880s, proving that botanical distribution had traced climatic reality far more accurately than colonial rainfall averages. Fact 23. the southern aurora driven by the magnetic dip. The aurora australis glows across southern Tasmanian skies when solar wind particles collide with gases in the upper atmosphere. Because the South Magnetic Pole sits off the coast of Antarctica directly south of Australia, the southern auroral oval frequently sweeps across latitudes 40 to 43 degrees south. At altitudes between 100 and 300 kilometers, excited atomic oxygen produces the characteristic green emission, while nitrogen ions generate deep crimson curtains visible from Bruny Island. Fact 22. The ancient marine current that isolates the West. Running south along the Western Australian coastline, the Leeuwin Current transports warm, low-salinity tropical water down to Cape Leeuwin and eastward into the Great Australian Bight. Unlike the cold, nutrient-rich currents along the western margins of southern Africa and South America, the Leeuwin Current suppresses coastal upwelling. As a result, tropical corals thrive at the Houtman-Abrolhos Islands at 28 degrees south, even while nearby continental shelves support low pelagic biomass. Fact 21. A continent shifting 7 centimeters a year. Australia sits atop the fastest-moving continental tectonic plate on Earth, drifting north-northeast at roughly 7 centimeters every year. By 2017, the physical continent had moved 1.8 meters away from the coordinates established by the geocentric datum of Australia, 1994. Geoscience Australia formally updated the National Coordinate System to GDA 2020 to ensure satellite systems and precision agriculture machinery aligned with physical property boundaries on the ground. Fact 20. The highest tidal range in the Southern Hemisphere. In King Sound, near Derby, Western Australia, the semi-diurnal tidal range reaches 11.8 meters. At horizontal narrowing points such as Talbot Bay, immense volumes of water are forced through 2 narrow gaps in the Maclarty Range, creating the horizontal falls. Seawater builds up to 5 meters higher on one side of the gorges than the other, generating violent marine rapids and whirlpools that reverse direction with every change of tide. Fact 19. The drowned prehistoric river mouth. Sydney Harbour is not an open marine gulf or a fault chasm, but a classic ria, or drowned river valley. During the last glacial maximum 20,000 years ago, sea levels were roughly 120 meters lower, and the ancestral Parramatta River cut deep sandstone canyons out past the present coastline. When global ice melted, marine transgression flooded the river system, turning sandstone ridges into headlands and submerging ancient First Nations cultural landscapes beneath Port Jackson. Fact 18. The burial ground preserved by inland aridity. At the Willandra Lakes in southwestern New South Wales, shifting winds gradually eroded clay dunes known as lunettes. In 1968, geologist Jim Bowler identified the cremated remains of Mungo Lady, followed in 1974 by the discovery of Mungo Man, dating back over 40,000 years. This arid sedimentary basin preserved the oldest known ritual cremation on Earth, where First Nations burials had remained protected beneath alternating layers of lake clays and desert sands since the Pleistocene epoch. Fact 17. An opal field where the town lives in the rock. At Coober Pedy in South Australia, miners extracting precious opal from weathered Cretaceous sandstone began living in dugouts excavated directly into hillsides. The subterranean siltstone maintains a constant temperature of 23 to 24 degrees Celsius year-round, insulating residents against summer desert extremes that regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius. Over half of the town's population currently resides inside these underground caverns and converted mine shafts. Yet beneath these mineral fields lies a deep structural anomaly that surface geology could never explain. Fact 16. The prohibited zone larger than England. The Woomera Prohibited Area in South Australia covers 122,000 square kilometres of arid desert. Established in 1947 under an agreement with the United Kingdom for missile and rocket trials, it remains one of the largest restricted land parcels on Earth. Access to roads, pastoral leases, and traditional Kokatha, Arabana, and Martu lands within the perimeter requires formal clearance and monitoring from the Department of Defence. Fact 15. An ancient freshwater reservoir under 1/5 of the land. The Great Artesian Basin covers 1.7 million square kilometres across Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, and the Northern Territory. Holding an estimated 64,900 cubic kilometres of groundwater, it consists of sandstone aquifers recharge-fed along the eastern highlands and trapped beneath impermeable mudstone layers. Since the first artesian bore was drilled in 1878 near Burke, artesian pressure has dropped substantially, prompting ongoing government capping and piping programs across thousands of pastoral bores. Fact 14. The world's largest lithium deposit preserved in weathered pegmatite. At Greenbushes in southwestern Western Australia, Mining operations exploit a lithium-rich pegmatite dike that intruded the crust over 2.5 billion years ago. While spodumene deposits globally are often locked in deep or inaccessible terrains, intense weathering and structural stability have preserved this massive, high-grade hard rock deposit close to the surface, making it the central pillar of global lithium extraction. Fact 13. The northernmost point where the reef meets the shore. Cape York Peninsula narrows to a sharp point at the tip, 10 degrees south of the equator, where the Coral Sea meets the Arafura Sea across the shallow waters of Torres Strait. Here, the continental shelf sits barely 20 meters beneath the surface, carrying submerged relic river valleys that once drained into Lake Carpentaria when sea levels were lower during the last ice age. Fact 12. A border offset by 90 seconds of arc. The colonial border between South Australia and Victoria was surveyed between 1847 and 1850 along the 141st meridian of east longitude. Due to rudimentary instruments and chaining errors through dense mallee scrub, surveyor Henry Wade marked the line roughly 3.4 kilometers west of the true astronomical meridian. The resulting disputed strip of roughly 1,200 square kilometers sparked legal battles between the states that were only resolved by the Privy Council in 1914. Fact 11. Rainforests that predate flowering plants. In the Daintree rainforest of northeastern Queensland, primitive angiosperm families such as Austrobaileaceae and Idiospermum australiense survive in sheltered coastal pockets between the mountains and the sea. These biological refugia persisted because the region escaped both continental glaciation and the catastrophic drying that swept inland Australia during the late Tertiary period. Fact 10. Mountains that stood higher than the Himalayas. The McDonnell Ranges in central Australia represent the heavily eroded roots of an ancient orogenic belt thrown up during the Alice Springs orogeny 450 to 300 million years ago. What once formed peaks rising thousands of meters into the sky has been planed down by hundreds of millions of years of subaerial weathering, leaving parallel quartzite ridges through which ancestral rivers have sliced narrow gaps. Fact 9. A town wiped clean from the register. In Western Australia's Pilbara region, the mining town of Wittenoom was formally de-gazetted and removed from official road maps, state records, and navigation databases. Decades of mining crocidolite, or blue asbestos, distributed over 3 million tons of toxic tailings across the local gorge and township area, prompting the state government to shut down infrastructure and cut the electricity grid to deter visitors. Yet this erased ground leads directly to the ultimate question of how Australia's continent-wide anomalies truly operate. Fact 8. The multi-mineral giant hidden beneath cover. At Olympic Dam in South Australia, geologists discovered the world's largest known single uranium deposit alongside major copper, gold, and silver reserves in 1975. The ore body was invisible from the surface, buried beneath 350 meters of flat sedimentary cover. Western Mining Corporation geophysicists targeted the site purely by analyzing regional tectonic lineaments combined with aeromagnetic and gravity anomalies, drilling into a blind target that revealed a massive breccia complex. Fact 7. The ancient aquaculture system etched into basalt. Across the Budj Bim cultural landscape in southwestern Victoria, the Gunditj Mara people engineered an extensive aquaculture network of channels, stone weirs, and holding ponds to manage and harvest short-finned eels. Built directly into the basalt lava flow of the Budj Bim volcano, dating back 6,600 years, it represents one of the oldest recorded permanent freshwater farming systems in human history, mapped in detail only after bushfires cleared the thick vegetation cover in 2020. Fact 6. The world's largest open-cut iron province. In the Pilbara region of Western Australia, the Hamersley Basin contains massive banded iron formations deposited 2.5 billion years ago. Cyanobacteria produced oxygen that precipitated dissolved ferrous iron from ancient oceans, laying down alternating layers of iron oxides and chert. The resulting hematite and magnetite beds, often exceeding hundreds of meters in thickness, now supply a major fraction of the world's seaborne iron ore. Fact 5. A modern mountain carved into a void. At Kalgoorlie, the Super Pit open-cut gold mine measures 3.5 kilometers long, 1.5 kilometers wide, and extends over 600 meters deep. Excavation consolidated hundreds of historic underground shafts originally dug along the Golden Mile in the 1890s. The void is so large that it generates its own localized air currents and microclimate within the surrounding semi-arid goldfields. Fact 4. The inland river system flowing away from the sea. The Lake Eyre Basin covers 1.2 million square kilometers, spanning roughly 1/6 of the entire continent. Rivers like the Diamantina, Georgina, and Cooper Creek do not flow toward the ocean, but drain inland through an intricate maze of braided channels across the Channel Country into Cutty-Thunder Lake Eyre. The lake bed sits 15 meters below sea level, filling completely only a few times per century when monsoonal floods travel thousands of kilometers across flat desert gradients. Fact 3. The buried impact structure hidden under desert plains. Beneath the Cooper Basin in southwestern Queensland sits the Tukanuka Impact Crater, 66 kilometers in diameter. Formed roughly 125 million years ago during the early Cretaceous, the structure is completely buried under thick Mesozoic and Cenozoic sediments. Petroleum exploration wells and seismic reflection profiling first identified the circular faulting and shocked quartz grains deep underground, revealing an impact that left no surface crater whatsoever. Fact 2. The perfectly preserved impact rim. At Wolf Creek Crater in northern Western Australia, known to the Jaru people as Kandi Malal, a meteorite crashed into flat Proterozoic quartzite roughly 120,000 years ago. Measuring 880 meters across and 60 meters deep from rim to floor, it remains the second largest confirmed crater on Earth from which meteorite fragments have been recovered. Aridity and structural stability prevented water erosion from leveling the raised limestone and sandstone rim. Fact 1. The continent that was never finished because it never moved down. Almost every entry on this list points directly to a single structural reality. Australia is not a continent that was carved and rejuvenated by recent tectonic collisions or widespread ice sheets. It is an intact, continuous landmass that has remained above sea level, drifting across the mantle while undergoing uninterrupted subaerial weathering for hundreds of millions of years. The soil was never stripped clean, the craters were never buried under glacial till, and the drainage networks simply adapted to an increasingly dry interior. What kept these patterns hidden for so long was not a lack of scale, but the assumption that geological dynamic change required sharp peaks, active volcanoes, and glacial gouging. Instruments, drill cores, and satellite telemetry continue to uncover deep structures across the cratons, while erosion steadily exposes relics that predate complex life itself. The printed map suggests a static desert, but the bedrock beneath it tells an entirely different story. Which geographic anomaly in your own state or territory has always seemed out of place to you? Share your observations below and subscribe to follow our next investigation across the landscape.